Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me, and we are in studio today, although some of it is being controlled remotely, so we're doing this as an experiment. We're hoping that we'll continue to broadcast from our studio, but if not, we certainly have a plan B in the work, so we'll work about that as well. But I do want to spend some time this hour talking about roaring lambs. That's something we've addressed before, but then a little bit later, we will get into some other topics. First of all, Joel Rosenberg was supposed to be in studio, but he went back to Israel, but we'll still have him by phone as we talk about his new book, The Jerusalem Assassin. And I might mention that as we even go into our Truth Team Week next week, which is an opportunity for you to invest in this ministry, we're going to be making a copy of that book available to you for your donation. So this is not only something that you can hear about, but actually something you can receive in the mail if you support Point of View. And then we'll get back into some of the news on the coronavirus, because after all, we have a couple of different studies. One, a very alarming study that says we need to be much more vigilant in order to deal with the virus crisis. But some individuals that have been on the program with us in the past, researchers with scientific background as well, are suggesting that maybe COVID-19 is less deadly than we thought it was. And of course, we're also making plans for a very different kind of world. Of course, it is possible that the election in November would be by mail. We'll talk about that. Steny Hoyer's talked about this, as well as others in Congress, even whether or not the members of Congress could vote electronically rather than be present. That's a big question, of course. Whether or not the gun bans will be in effect. As a matter of fact, in California, they now have purchased some of these Chinese-made patrol drones with night vision in order to actually control the lockdown that is taking place there. And, of course, the Olympics have been postponed for a year, so we just have a lot to cover in the next couple of hours. So I hope you'll join us. And in many cases, if you are stuck at home because you are supposed to be in lockdown or shelter in some situation, then we certainly do encourage you to be listening and take advantage of the fact that we can be your lifeline for some of this news and information and spiritual input. Let me first of all introduce a couple of individuals to be with us this hour. First is Donna Skell. Hardly needs any introduction. She's been on the program with us many times before. She's been on the staff of Roaring Lambs, came on in 2008, oversees all sorts of different events and Bible studies, and before that actually served as a spokesperson for the American Tract Society. And Donna, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you, Kerby. It's good to be here today.
And then we also want to introduce to you an individual that if you've gone to any of the Roaring Lamb events, you certainly have met Anton Skell. Of course, he is married to Donna, and of course, they both for a while operated various health clubs in a number of different states, served as a deacon at Prestonwood, and now also is the board member of Roaring Lambs, a teacher, and also the comptroller. So, Anton, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's a privilege to be on this show. I remember in 1980 when I first moved to Dallas and turned on Point of View for the first time and listened to the great Marlon Maddox, and have been a fan of this program and you for many years.
I just mentioned this table that we're broadcasting from was built back in the 1990s. It's one that Marlon Maddox has used, of course, Penna Dexter, myself, and all sorts of others. It's been refurbished a few times, but it's still that original table, and we will spend some time this hour talking about roaring lambs. But as always, Donna, let's explain what a roaring lamb is. Every time I say that, I can tell whether or not people know what we're talking about, because some people shake their head knowingly and others kind of cock their head like, a roaring lamb? What is that?
It certainly gets their attention. We are named, our ministry is named for the book Roaring Lambs, which was written by Bob Briner. It's a wonderful book. It's still available today. But we take that term, roaring lamb, pretty literally. A lamb represents a Christian, and a roaring lamb is one that's unashamed of the gospel and wants other people to know Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. So it's a Christian who can't keep quiet about the goodness of God.
And so, again, if you go to roaringlambs.org, you're going to find out that there are all sorts of events. There are opportunities for a Christian Writers Conference, which we're going to talk about. There's an opportunity for you, especially once we come out of this lockdown and shelter in place and a variety of other things, to actually attend the Bible study. And Anton, talk about that, because for many years, various listeners either attended or maybe heard us talk about the Bible studies that were actually put together by Gary Kinder, but you now have taken on that mantle. And one of the things that I think is so exciting is that you teach through the Bible. So if you stay in that Bible study long enough, you will hear a verse-by-verse exposition of the entire 66 books of the Bible. But tell us where you are right now and what you have been teaching on recently.
Well, Kerby, ironically enough, I'm teaching the book of Revelation. And in fact, we're going into chapter 14 this Sunday. Unfortunately, we can't all get together. We have to do it via conference call and the internet and email. But, I think it's just wonderful that Gary set the platform for me for 40 years. He retired 2 years ago. And we went through the Bible line by line. Took 10 years each time. And so we're going to finish up Revelation. Hopefully the rapture might happen before that, but if not, we'll go back to Genesis 1:1 and start all over again.
So again, if you wanted to know more about that Bible study and maybe even join through some kind of connection, it could be a conference call. I know a lot of people are starting to do Zoom calls and things of that nature. That is just one area. But I did want to focus some time and attention, really, Donna, if I could, with you on these various events, because if a listener, for example, would like to hone his or her testimony, there's a way in which you have done teaching there. There is an opportunity for people to submit their written testimony to be considered for one of the many books that you have, Stories of Roaring Faith, and so we can talk about that. Of course, we have always liked to promote the Christian Writers Conference, and we hope that by July that is going to take place. For that reason, as well as, of course, we've been promoting the Promise Keepers event, which will be July 31st, August 1st. So we're hoping that even though we won't have the Olympics this summer, we will have some of these different events. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some of these events and the ways in which you can connect up with Roaring Lambs. And most importantly, as you go there, there's an opportunity for you to learn about those events. There's an opportunity for you to contact them. There's a place for you to donate to this ministry. And if you have never been to some of their events, whether it's their annual banquet or various workshops to teach you how to put your testimony together, or the Christian Writers Conference, these are all great resources. And you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or simply just go directly to roaringlambs.org. And we'll continue our conversation with Donna and Anton Skell. And I might just also mention that some of you, perhaps you're familiar with the organization, would like to join in today. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Maybe you've actually been able to share your testimony. You've learned from some of these events, maybe been to a Christian Writers Workshop or been to one of the banquets. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation about Roaring Lambs right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Often when I talk about the deaths of despair affecting so many young people, I am asked, why are so many unhappy? There are a number of reasons, but first let's discuss how serious this problem has become. In the U.S., the suicide rate quadrupled for young men and doubled for young women from 1946 to 2006. Another study found that suicidal thinking, severe depression, and the rate of self-injury among U.S. college students more than doubled over less than a decade. Dennis Prager suggests that the reasons for such despair can be put into two categories: loss of values and loss of meaning. The loss of values is easy to document in this country. Judeo-Christian values were important in the founding of this country and important in the maintenance of this republic. Also, middle-class values were important. This would include getting married, making a family, getting a good job, demonstrating self-discipline, and patriotism. Values were also lost when various communal associations declined. The Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville explained that the strength of America derived from their professional, social, civil, political, artistic, philanthropic, and religious institutions. A second reason for despair is lack of meaning. Viktor Frankl, in his classic work, Man's Search for Meaning, reminds us how meaning, or the lack of it, can explain so much about human nature. Poor people can be happy if they have meaning, while rich people who have money but no meaning are usually unhappy. Religious faith can give life meaning, and more young people have no connection to religion. The fastest growing demographic among young people are the nones, those who define themselves as atheist, agnostic, or no preference. So many young people today are unhappy because of the loss of values and the loss of meaning. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again talking about roaring lambs, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Donna Skell, Anton Skell with us. And Donna, if we can, let's encourage people to go to your website. The middle section there on events talks about the Bible study, but let's talk about some of the others, because there is an opportunity for individuals to even write their written testimony. But before we get to that, there may be some people that say, I'm not sure I know how to give a testimony that's going to be effective. And the good news is you've provided some great resources over the years and even different events that people will be able to go to, I hope, in the future, so that they can really begin to hone that down and make that testimony more effective. Tell us about that, if you might.
Oh, you are so right, Kerby. When folks come into the testimony workshop, very often they don't know where to start with their story. They think they need to tell their life story or put together their whole life story, when really a testimony, just like in the court of law, a testimony is a witness of what you have seen and heard. And so you could take one little situation that you dealt with in your life, or you might take a couple, and show how you know Jesus to be real, how you have seen God at work in that situation. The testimony workshop provides a structure for people to just more or less fill in the blanks with their life and be able to effectively share the Lord. It's the first step in sharing the gospel, really, is to share how you know this is real.
And so for people that maybe have already gone through that, or maybe have been giving their testimony for a number of years, We have mentioned in the past that you put together some of these stories, and one of the editions, Stories of Roaring Faith. I know that you've got a deadline coming up in that regard, so if somebody would like to maybe even put their testimony in print, talk about that.
Yes, and the good news is that deadline has been extended a little while. We are working on Book 5, Volume 5 of Stories of Roaring Faith. And as you said, they are a collection of real-life testimonies. And if any of your listeners would like to submit a story, all they have to do is type it up, maybe around 2,500 to 3,500 words, which is probably about 10 or 12 double-space type pages, and send it to info@roaringlambs.org. We would be glad to consider including their testimony in our next book, which will be released in November at our Hall of Fame event.
Well, again, that is an opportunity. We have a link to, of course, roaringlambs.org, so you can either follow it on our website, pointofview.net, or go there directly. Left-hand corner there talks about that, and perhaps if you'd like to get yourself published in terms of your testimony, that's the case. But, Donna, that now leads to, of course, one of the things we like to talk with you about every single year, and that is the Christian Writers Conference. We've been privileged to have you and Carol Kinder Ladd and, of course, Mary DeMuth and all sorts of other people with you to promote that conference. We're hoping that that will take place, and talk about this, because I am well aware of a number of individuals, some of whom have actually been on this program when we've talked about their finished book, who first came to the idea of publishing a book by going to your conference. And so this has been going for many years, and tell us what that might be and when that is going to take place and how people can participate.
Sure. Lord willing, it will be July 18th, and it will be here in Dallas. And it's a full day. It's a full day to allow the Lord to speak to you about your writing. We bring in great speakers who have great experience to really share their knowledge and their experience with all of the participants. In fact, this year we have a new speaker, Dr. Jim Huggins. He's out of Oregon, and he is a film producer, but he teaches storytelling at a Christian university there. And so he's real excited about coming in and just talking about storytelling. There is an art to telling a story, and Dr. Huggins is an expert at it. So I'm real excited that he is coming. I'm excited that you're going to come, Kerby, and share at our Writers Conference. That's always a big blessing. You always challenge the writers to make their writing count. And so it's a great day. We have a beautiful luncheon. And one of the big benefits is just connecting, networking with some of the other writers there who may be at the same level you are, and hearing what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, and just enjoying a whole day thinking, praying, and learning about the art of writing.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about this kind of new environment of publishing. Since I'm the old guy around the table, I can remember a time when you would type it up on a typewriter. You would send it off to the publisher. They would send you back many months later a galley proof. Then eventually you would agree that you pretty much have made the necessary changes, and eventually the book would show up in the mail along with some others maybe you've ordered, and then you would hope that they would do the marketing so that at least more than your family members would buy the book. And that is so different now with social media, and that's one of the things that I've benefited by going to the Christian Writers Conference, because they say Facebook pages, Twitter, all sorts of different venues, even the fact that you can self-publish books and all sorts of things have really created an environment where our listeners, if they really feel that they have a story in them or they have something they want to share, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we really live in a very different world when you can publish relatively quickly. You can be involved in much more of the marketing and in some respects be much more successful than in the old days.
Oh, definitely. In fact, one book that Roaring Lambs helped to publish, we had it back in 45 days. It was a miracle, but it was C.C. Jennings from Operation Care in One Day 2020. She wrote her book, and 45 days later, she had her book in her hands. And so it can happen that quickly. So that's one of the big benefits of self-publishing, as well as probably earning a little bit more money, certainly more money per book that you sell than you would if you were traditionally published. And, you know, traditional publishers generally won't take a first-time author. And so the options for not getting traditionally published are really good.
I would think so. One of the other items on your website is something that was supposed to take place, and I'm sure there will be other opportunities to help people make some decisions about whether or not to go the traditional publishing route or independent publishing. And I thought I might have you and Anton even talk about the fact that if somebody would like to publish a book, that's something else that you've been providing through Roaring Lambs.
Exactly. We do want to help bring your book to market, and so we can help you every aspect of the way. We have a team that are great at designing covers. We have a team of editors who will go through your book and make sure it's grammatically sound, that it flows, that it's well written, and we can take it all the way to publishing it for you. So if we can help anybody, we'd be glad to do it, and you can just look at our website or contact me at info@roaringlambs.org.
I might also mention when we come back from the break that I might talk to Anton and you about some of the other opportunities. You have the Word on Wheels. Of course, you have been involved in doing radio as well, so we're going to talk about that. I want to talk about all the equipping ministries that are actually available through Roaring Lambs. And, of course, so also at this time, we want people to consider what they might do to support various ministries, and certainly your ministry has been involved in changing the culture for Christ by inspiring, equipping, and providing opportunities for Christians to communicate their faith. And certainly that is very similar to kind of the mission statement of Point of View, which is why we've always had such a great partnership with you. So let's, if we can, take a break. And if some of you that are listening right now would like to ask a question, maybe you said, I never thought about the fact that maybe I could publish a book. Maybe you'd like to know about that. Maybe you'd like to get your testimony published, or maybe you'd like to know about some of the other aspects of ministry. Maybe even like to join with the Bible study that we have been talking about. Feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. And as we go to the break, I would encourage you to go to roaringlambs.org so that as we come back from the break, we'll talk about some of the other material and resources that are available. In case you would like to participate, there's a newsletter, there are workshops, there are all sorts of things that need to be put on the table here. But most importantly, if we can answer some of your questions, we'd love to do so. So again, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And if you find yourself saying you might like to listen to this again, we have an opportunity as you go to pointofview.net to click on the button that says watch or listen, and you can either listen to the broadcast again, download the podcast, or send it to maybe somebody that you know that maybe benefit from some of the conversation we're having right now. Of course, if you'd like to watch it, of course, it will be up shortly on the YouTube channel as well. But we need to take a break, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, talking today about roaring lambs, and you can go to the website to find out a little bit more. Donna Skell and Anton Skell with us. And Anton, let me come to you for just a minute, because when people first probably ask you about what roaring lambs does, I suspect the first thing they'll hear is because you have a lot to talk about. I think most people have no idea about all the different aspects of that ministry, which maybe is a testimony to the forward thinking and creativity of Gary Kinder. But give us an overview of everything that Roaring Lambs is doing, and then how individuals might be able to support you.
Well, Kerby, Gary Kinder set a tremendous example over the years for reaching out and reaching the communities. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is our Roaring Lambs Hall of Fame. A lot of your listeners don't know, but each year we have several people nominated. We select an honoree, and they come from virtually every aspect of business, politics, and sports. And a lot of people don't know that you were inducted in 2013, but we've had about 50 that have been inducted. Our date this year is November 14th here in Dallas. We've got several great people nominated. In fact, your next guest, Joel, has been nominated as well, but we have selected one so far, and that's the wonderful Mrs. June Hunt, the founder of the Hope Center here in Dallas, and she'll go into our Hall of Fame November 14th. It's a great banquet, a great evening. We also have a ministry called Word on Wheels. We have a heart at Roaring Lambs for seniors. We really do, and we have three ladies, Jean Bowie, Jerry Moore, and Janet Kinder, our founder's wife, who helped us organize and teach Bible studies in over 40 assisted care living facilities, and these include full nursing homes, assisted care. Now, unfortunately, with this coronavirus lockdown, we've had to take a pause there, but we're still having that organization go well. And I have a heart for seniors. In fact, today is my birthday.
Well, how about that?
And I have turned 68, so I'm officially in that group. And we certainly love to reach out. The radio program that Donna and Lisa Burkhart-Worley, I'll let her tell you more about, but that reaches out way beyond the Dallas market and into the world. And I think right now it's important that we as Christians, that we be encouragers. You know, the best anxiety and fear medicine is to spend time in the Scriptures. I love the 23rd Psalm, the 27th Psalm, and, of course, my favorite, Joshua 1:9, where he says, I have commanded you, be not afraid. Be strong and courageous. The Lord is with you wherever you go. So I feel like people need to hear that message and stop watching the news 24 hours a day. It's just not healthy. It's not healthy physically or spiritually. So at Roaring Lambs, we take it to heart that we want to be God's salt and light here on earth and help other people be the same.
Well, again, we try to provide you with some of that information so you don't have to listen all the time, and certainly wanted to highlight some of the different ministries at Roaring Lambs. And Word on Wheels, I'm hoping we can get back up very quickly, because I recognize that some of those individuals that you've been visiting are obviously maybe compromised or in a difficult situation, but those are the individuals we'd like to minister to. So we'll see how this goes. And, of course, we're in the midst of shelter in place, so many parts of the country and even so many parts of the Metroplex here. But, Donna, we did mention something else, and that is radio. And that is another aspect of the outreach of Roaring Lambs, isn't it?
It is. In fact, it's been 6 years. 6 years ago, we were gifted with the ability to be an hour-long show that goes all over the world. It actually goes through shortwave radio into communist countries where there is no Christian programming. Of course, it goes through the Internet, and now we're on Trans World Radio 360, WRNO, Fishbowl Radio Network, and our show is all testimonies. We interview people so that the gospel can be shared. We give an invitation to receive Christ at the end of each show, and my co-host Lisa Burkhart-Worley spent 19 years in television and is very gifted at interviewing, and if you have a story to share, we'd love to interview you over the radio. So that's another opportunity for Christians to share their faith. You know, not everybody can relate to the circumstances that we hear about in a testimony, but everybody can relate to the emotion and how that person felt. And so we connect with one another on an emotional level. If you have a story of loss, well, maybe everybody hasn't experienced loss, but when you tell what loss feels like, they've felt the same emotions. So connect emotionally with people and then show them how God can comfort them, how the Word has all the wisdom, and we lead them in a prayer to receive Christ.
So again, just some great opportunities. Since Anton mentioned that, let me encourage you to get something to write with, because I want you to mark your calendars for a couple of different events. One that certainly he mentioned a minute ago is the Roaring Lambs Hall of Fame, and by November 14th, I think we can be assured that we can all gather together. And the honorees last year were individuals that we've talked about here before and talked with on this program. David Barton, of course, with Wall Builders, and Jim Beckett. Of course, the Beckett baseball cards and the Beckett organization are just a few of those individuals. And if you go down the list of honorees, we have so many individuals that we've interviewed on this program, like Todd Starnes and Steve and Jackie Green, Colonel Alan West, who oftentimes sits in this chair for me, and Colonel West, but also Louis Gomert and a variety of other individuals just in the last couple of years. Of course, Jim Dennison, who's with us on a regular basis. So just this kind of a who's who, and a great opportunity to hear from some of those individuals. So want to, first of all, encourage you to actually mark that particular date, because that is an important one, because once we start talking about these issues, going to be important for you to make sure that you can make it to these various events. And, of course, another one, as we mentioned just a minute ago, Donna, is July 18th. That's Saturday. And I've said before that whether you live in the Dallas area or whether you live across the country, we've had people come from, I think, as far away as Alaska to actually be at the Christian Writers Conference. So put that on your calendar, and let's hope that we're all gathering together there in July. But again, give us an idea of what that looks like, because people say, okay, I hear one or two speakers and that's it. Nope, you get a chance to hear from all sorts of individuals. You can meet people that are ghostwriters. You can meet people that are in the publishing industry. You've already, of course, mentioned somebody that will be an expert on storytelling. You can meet fellow authors and published authors and others just getting started for the first time. So it's just a great fellowship event, isn't it?
It sure is, and actually you can meet one-on-one with different publishers and also film producer. So if that's your goal, if you've written a story that you think would make a great film, we can set up a 20-minute consultation with a film producer for you at that event.
So again, let's take a break, and when we come back, I thought for just a minute we might talk about all the books that we are talking about here today at your store. And I thought maybe also could have Anton talk a little bit more about, well, if somebody'd like to kind of be a member, if you have a membership opportunity or contribution opportunity there, those are some key dates that we wanted to focus on. And again, maybe some final spiritual comments about what we find ourselves in right now. And then, of course, we're going to be talking with our good friend Joel Rosenberg Rosenberg, who was supposed to be in studio with us. Matter of fact, we purchased all sorts of copies of his book to hand out to anybody that, first of all, would have a chance to come out and watch the interview with him. But he had to go back to Israel, so he is there and kind of self-quarantine at the moment. But we will nevertheless have a chance to chat with him next hour. And we are making available, as I mentioned, his book, The Jerusalem Assassin, the latest novel in this series, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And that is something we're also not only making available for you to go and purchase in your local bookstore, but it's one of those thank you gifts we'll be sending to those of you that want to support this ministry. And so that, along with a flash drive I'll be talking about and a number of other benefits that we always provide to you, are ways in which you can support this ministry. And so I hope you'll consider what you can do. And most importantly, I hope that you will stay with us as we talk with Joel Rosenberg the next hour. But let's take a break. We'll come back and finish off our conversation today with Anton Skell and Donna Skell. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The January 2020 edition of Christianity Today features the headline, The Hidden Cost of Tax Exemption. The author makes his case for why American churches may be better off for refusing what he calls the government largesse of tax exemptions. The article portrays churches in America as basically parasitical, with pastors feeding on the benefits their churches drain from their host community without returning much noticeable benefit. The story contends that the appeal of the tax exemption is rooted in a historical desire to propagate racism and further discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The story ends with these words, "It might not be such a bad thing to lose tax-exempt status. The true Church of God, after all, is not reliant on its special status in the tax code. We can walk by faith and not by government largesse." Well, in truth, rather than make churches more ideologically faithful, the loss of the tax exemption for churches would invade upon church autonomy and curb religious liberty. The true Church of God is less a target to be taxed or a parasite to be crushed, and more a quiet blessing upon a world in need of the peace they preach and acts of service they humbly perform. A local gathering of religious believers should be viewed as a human right of religious association and free exercise worthy of protection, rather than a potential stream of revenue. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we have Donna Skell with us, as well as Anton Skell with Roaring Lambs. So again, go to roaringlambs.org for some more information. And Anton, let's talk about that. If somebody wants to participate with you, maybe they like to get your newsletter, maybe they like to actually get a membership, if they'd like to maybe host a table when you are talking about the idea of the Hall of Fame banquet and those kinds of things, how can people participate with you?
Well, various ways, Kerby. We we certainly don't talk about money very much. We prefer just to do the job, and as Gary Kinder said, the money will come, and it has for 40 years, so we're grateful for that. But for any donation of $35 or more, you become a member of the Roaring Lambs family. And you get our newsletter updates, you get all the information, and a copy of Gary Kinder's book, Step Up and Step Out. And the banquet that's coming up, and by the way, Colonel Allen West, Lieutenant Colonel Allen West that you mentioned previously, one of the things we like to do is have special speakers come to our Bible study and guest teach. And he taught a couple of weeks ago, and I'm reading his book now, Hold Texas, Hold the Nation, Victory or Death. It's a great book. It's about the upcoming election. And, of course, Colonel West is running for the GOP chairman here in Texas. I also like this book. It's called Old-Fashioned Values Matter, and that was written by Jack Bush and Frank Ball. They're both in our Bible study, and we published that book. But Jack was the CEO of Michael's and a tremendous guy, and I love this book, Old-Fashioned Values. But as far as the Hall of Fame banquet, we do tables of 10 for a $1,000 donation. The banquet lasts about 3 hours, and we have a tremendous meal. And Leona Rupert puts all the music together. It's some of the finest music that people said that they have heard. So we're grateful for her. She also supplies the singers for our class each week. In our Bible study, we feed the body first. We do a complimentary breakfast, and then we do about an hour teaching, and we have great music. So there's so much that people can participate in, as much or as little as they wish.
If we can, for just a few minutes, let's, if we can, Donna, talk about some of the books. We just mentioned one of those, Old-Fashioned Values Matter by Jack Bush and Frank Ball, but also you mentioned earlier the whole series of Stories of Roaring Faith, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then some people might say, you know, you mentioned this book, Roaring Lambs by Bob Reiner. You have that available as well, too, don't you?
We sure do, and that's a great book. Now, the Stories of Roaring Faith, it's a great book to give to a non-believer. When you read 30 different stories of how real God is in someone's life, it really does help you make the decision to become a believer. So if you know someone who's struggling with their faith, maybe they've drifted from their faith, or maybe they've just never really been personally introduced to Jesus Christ, Stories of Roaring Faith is a great book. It's also a great book of encouragement. If you're going through anything, there are stories about addiction, abuse, abandonment, divorce, death. I mean, there are stories about every life issue you can imagine in these books. And if you know someone who's struggling with a life issue, I'll be glad to tell you which book that story is in. And that'd be a great gift to show them that somebody else struggling with the same thing has gotten through it with the help of the Lord.
And again, there's a button there that says Contact Us, and so you can do that connection. One other one I thought I just might mention real quickly, and that is Eyewitness, which is, in a sense, taking all these different verses and putting them in kind of a chronological story. And then you have a way in which people can either read the book individually, or if they wanted to use this in a way for maybe a Bible study class or a Sunday school class, those are available as well, aren't they?
Right. Eyewitness is a great book. It is a story of Jesus. It takes every mention of Jesus in the New Testament and puts it together in a chronological story, just as if you were reading his autobiography. I know some people that use it as a devotion. They take a different chapter every day, and that's part of their devotion. So it is a great book. We have several folks that have wanted them for their Bible study, to use it as a Bible study that they could teach through. So it's a great book. And also the other book is Step Up and Step Out, and it is the story of this ministry, how one man who was a roaring lamb, who decided to do his part and be salt and light and step forward, and he was a local businessman. He had never taught a Bible study before, but a local pastor asked him if he'd be willing, and he stepped up to the plate. And look what has happened because of him being bold and willing and able to do that. So it is the story from start to finish of Gary Kinder and how this whole ministry began and how it grew.
And again, just a great story there as well. One last time, I want to encourage those of you that have been listening here to schedule in your calendar Saturday, July 18th. If you maybe have a book in you, or maybe you have been thinking about doing a blog, or maybe you'd like to write articles for Christian Magazine or something like this, this will be the 15th annual Summer Writers Conference, and it's all day Saturday, July 18th. It'll be taking place in Carrollton. And for those of you that say, well, I'd like to pass this on to someone that didn't have a chance to hear the interview, you can give them a link to this. Go to roaringlambs.org/conferences. Or also there's a video. It's about a minute and a half long, and that is an invitation to the Writers' Conference. So you might send that along as well. That might pique their interest, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to not only educate you about this issue, but you may know somebody that needs to know about some of the things we've talked about today with Anton and Donna. And I do want to thank both of you for joining us today here on Point of View, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kerby, for having us.
Thank you, Kerby. I'd just like to leave you with one of my favorite verses, John 14:27, where Jesus said, I leave my peace with you. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not be afraid.
So again, great way to begin to remind us at a time when things are a little bit uncertain. So it's been great to have you both here, and I encourage all of you to find out more about Roaring Lambs. Let's just, before we take a break here, mention that Joel Rosenberg will be with us. And again, this is the latest in his installment of the story of Marcus Riker, and we're going to be talking about what's called the Jerusalem Assassin. Now, I never give away the plot too much, but we use that as a conversation that we can have about what is happening right now in Israel, what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Iran, and of course, this is a very serious look, in a fictional way, of course, of a collusion between Russia, Iran, North Korea, and some of these radical Islamic terrorist organizations. So we're going to be talking about that with him. And most importantly, if you have some comments or questions about what has been taking place in this incredible set of circumstances right now in the Middle East, and of course our own circumstances here in this country, I would encourage you to tune in, and maybe even encourage others to listen in this next hours. We'll be talking with our friend Joel Rosenberg, who will be joining us long distance, obviously, from Israel. The book Jerusalem Assassin has just come out, and that's why we wanted you to know about it, and we are making it available as one of the offers to those of you that support this ministry. And so we'll talk more about that a little bit later. And if you find yourself saying, you've covered a lot of topics and I'm not sure how to get all that information, simply go to pointofview.net, click on the picture of Donna Skell, and that will take you to roaringlambs.com. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. the Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View radio talk show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. As we've been promoting, we are going to spend some time today with Joel Rosenberg. Now, the original plan was for him to be sitting across from me, but that, of course, has changed, as we've talked about in terms of the coronavirus. The virus crisis has changed everything. And in the next hour, we'll get into some of that, talking about whether or not we might have to vote by mail in November. Don't think so, but even what this means right now for members of Congress, whether they could vote electronically. We have, of course, California talking about now purchasing some Chinese-made patrol drones to actually enforce the lockdown. Some are banning guns. We're going to get into some studies, one that suggests that we need to do even more to beat the coronavirus, another that says maybe the coronavirus or COVID-19 isn't as lethal as we thought that it was. So we will have a lot to cover in the next hour, but this hour we're going to spend some time talking with our good friend Joel Rosenberg, of course, a New York Times best-selling author, 15 novels with 5 nonfiction books in print, and, of course, an individual that has met face-to-face with the current president, the vice president, as well as the Secretary of State, the King of Jordan, and much more. And we're going to be talking about this newest book that has just come out, The Jerusalem Assassin. The 2 previous novels based on Marcus Riker, The Kremlin Conspiracy and The Persian Gamble, are out, but this one is new. And by the way, we are making it available to those of you that actually support Point of View as we do our Truth Team next week. But first of all, our good friend Joel Rosenberg joins us now by phone from Israel. How are you doing?
Hey, Kerby, greetings from quarantine in Jerusalem. So far safe and secure, but definitely not the week that I had anticipated.
I would imagine. Talk about that for just a minute, because I know when you come into the country, as some of our friends were going there for a tour of Israel, you have to actually, in a sense, quarantine. And, of course, self-quarantine is what a lot of us are doing anyway. But give us a little bit of a sense of what is happening right there in Israel right now.
Sure, happy to, Kerby. Well, so I was on, as you said, the beginnings of the book tour for The Jerusalem Assassin, my new political thriller. And, of course, the tour began to unravel. It just wasn't going to be right to be meeting with people, and people didn't want to meet anyway. So I called my wife. I said, listen, the Israeli Foreign Ministry is saying that every Israeli who wants to come home better come home immediately, because there may just not be any flights soon. So rather than doing continued radio interviews and things in the States, I said, I'm coming home. She said, okay, just to be clear, you're coming into quarantine. You know that, right? I
Yes.
Said, right. So I'll just be home with you guys. She said, well, okay, not exactly. What this means, so I just had this view that I just had to stay home, right? That's what we think of when we think self-quarantine.
Nope.
What she said, but no, in this case, I will drive one car, and one of our sons will drive your car. We'll both come to the airport. You cannot hug us. You cannot kiss us. We will wave to you from the other car, but one of the sons will put the keys to your car on the seat of, your car, and then you'll drive by yourself. You'll follow us. When you get to Jerusalem, with your mask on and with gloves, you'll move immediately through the apartment into the master bedroom. She said, I've cleared all my stuff out. I can't be in there. And for 14 days, you're going to lock yourself in that room. And she said, I'd put you in the guest room, but that doesn't have an attached bathroom. We're just in an apartment. So That's where I am. 14 days, no contact with anybody. Like the cat, they set food in a bowl outside the door of my bedroom, and I, open it up. I wave to them from a distance. I take the food. I lock the door again. I mean, it is funny.
It's just crazy.
This is a crazy moment, unprecedented in any time in the modern age. And I literally just got off the phone with a New York Times reporter who's asking me, do you think this has something to do with the end of the world and Bible prophecy? So we'll get to that point. But, yeah, I'm getting that question a lot.
I bet you are. And a lot of people said, is this a plague of the Bible? So let's, first of all, just before we go too much further, spend some time talking about the Jerusalem assassin. And, of course, we're following the story of Marcus Riker, the former U.S. Secret Service agent. The book is quite thick. It's got 4 different sections. It is published by our good friends at Tyndale. And so, again, just an exciting read, 400 and almost 40 pages of material. But it's also bringing together some things I know we want to talk about, and that is this interesting relationship between Russia and Iran, North Korea, and maybe even some of the radical terrorists. But we're picking up with the idea of there actually being a peace summit. But what would happen if there was an attempt to try to assassinate the president in so doing? Without giving away all the story, give us a little bit more of an update of what we will find in the Jerusalem assassin.
Well, Kerby, first of all, I want to say thank you, because most of the interviews I've done over the last 2 weeks, people are like, yeah, that's all very interesting, you and your novel. But then we've got bigger fish to fry, so let's talk about coronavirus, and we will. But yes, honestly, if the Jerusalem assassin had come out a month and a half ago, that would have been right at the moment that President Trump unveiled his actual Middle East peace plan,
yes.
And then it would have seemed very prescient, this novel. Now it seems a little off message, but the basic premise of the Jerusalem assassin is that the American president is about to roll out his big Middle East peace plan, but a series of senior U.S. officials start getting assassinated. This rattles the president, who was not expecting this. It's happening from an unknown terror group that's taking credit that no one's ever heard of before. And the president's thinking maybe this is just the wrong moment. He should not roll out this plan. But right at that moment of his indecision, he gets a message, a back channel message from the Saudi Arabian government. And the Saudis say, listen, Mr. President, your people have briefed us on the basics of your plan. Honestly, we're not enthusiastic. We don't agree with everything in your plan. However, we are ready to explore peace with Israel. And if you, Mr. President, will invite the Crown Prince or the King of Saudi Arabia to Jerusalem for a high-level peace summit that you, Mr. President, would host and would happen with the Prime Minister of Israel, then the Saudi leadership will come. Well, the president is electrified by this idea because he knows the Palestinian leadership isn't ready for peace. He thinks, wow, if the Saudis were ready, that would be huge. And at that point, his security team says, Mr. President, with all respect, have you gone insane?
Mm-hmm.
You can't go to Jerusalem and stand on the Temple Mount and have a peace summit with the Saudi leader and the Israeli leader and you while we have an unknown terror force out there. And so to wrap that up, the president turns to Marcus Riker, former Marine in Afghanistan and in Iraq. He's a former Secret Service agent on the Presidential Protective Detail. And he says, Marcus, you and your team make this thing safe, and it'll be fine. And now the countdown is on. Everybody's converging into Israel, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's the premise.
It's a good one. We'll take a break. And again, Brad Thor says, a taut, brilliant thriller. The Jerusalem Assassin is an absolute home run. And if you're looking for a good read, we are making it available. Of course, you can get it both in hardback and Kindle. And when we come back, I know we have a few other questions for Joe Rosenberg, and I know you do as well. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Often when I talk about the deaths of despair affecting so many young people, I am asked, why are so many unhappy? There are a number of reasons, but first let's discuss how serious this problem has become. In the U.S., the suicide rate quadrupled for young men and doubled for young women from 1946 to 2006. Another study found that suicidal thinking, severe depression, and the rate of self-injury among U.S. college students more than doubled over less than a decade. Dennis Prager suggests that the reasons for such despair can be put into two categories: loss of values and loss of meaning. The loss of values is easy to document in this country. Judeo-Christian values were important in the founding of this country and important in the maintenance of this republic. Also, middle-class values were important. This would include getting married, making a family, getting a good job, demonstrating self-discipline, and patriotism. Values were also lost when various communal associations declined. The Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville explained that the strength of America derived from their professional, social, civil, political, artistic, philanthropic, and religious institutions. A second reason for despair is lack of meaning. Viktor Frankl, in his classic work, Man's Search for Meaning, reminds us how meaning, or the lack of it, can explain so much about human nature. Poor people can be happy if they have meaning, while rich people who have money but no meaning are usually unhappy. Religious faith can give life meaning, and more young people have no connection to religion. The fastest growing demographic among young people are the nones, those who define themselves as atheists, agnostic, or no preference. So many young people today are unhappy because of the loss of values and the loss of meaning. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Joe Rosenberg, and of course going all the way back to his first book, The Last Jihad and the Last Jihad Collection, the Ezekiel Option and the Copper Scroll and some of those. Of course, you have the 12th Imam Collection. Now we're talking about the Marcus Riker novels, and that would be, of course, the Kremlin Conspiracy, the Persian Gamble, the Jerusalem Assassin. Not to mention the fact that, of course, there are a lot of various nonfiction books, in particular Epicenter. And I thought we might focus on this for another few minutes before we get into, of course, all the other topics. And that is, Israel has always been the epicenter. But if you think about your comment about Saudi Arabia, for a while, Saudi Arabia was kind of the epicenter. You have the murder of Khashoggi. You have the Iranian air strikes, drone strikes against the Saudi oil facilities. You've had kind of the whole relationship that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. So that's one of the kind of plot twists in this novel. But it's also been something very interesting in terms of current issues, isn't it?
Well, that's right. Saudi Arabia has, of course, been a major center in the Middle East for oil, one of the largest oil producers in the world, and, of course, probably did more devastating economic impact on the United States and the West during the oil embargoes of the 1970s than almost any other event that we've seen in the modern era. But Saudi Arabia is under enormous change. Highly controversial new crown prince, the heir to the throne, a man named Mohammed bin Salman, often commonly referred to as MBS. Mm-hmm. Maybe the most vilified and controversial leader on the planet at the moment, if you maybe set aside Vladimir Putin. And he has embarked on an enormous change regime. Like, he is trying to change his economy, his society, he's not trying to change the politics of Saudi Arabia. It's still going to be an absolute monarchy. But some of his changes are very, very positive and very encouraging. Others are very troubling and super controversial. And for some reason, the Crown Prince invited me, a Jewish, Israeli, American, evangelical, Zionist, with two sons who've served in the Israeli army. For some reason, the Crown Prince invited me to bring not just one, but two delegations of evangelical Christian leaders to come to meet him, get to know him, and talk about very candid. We had very candid conversations, and these are the first time Christian leaders have ever been invited to meet with the Saudi leadership in the palaces in more than 300 years, we were told. So something extraordinary is happening, and most novelists don't really get the chance to meet with people like that. But to spend hours and hours and hours of candid, very direct conversation on issues of peace and war and terror and reform and Christianity and Islam, it was interesting in its own right. It also provided an interesting set of backdrops for me to write this new political thriller, The Jerusalem Assassin.
Yeah, you knew exactly where I was going with that because, I wanted to mention the fact that you had been with the Crown Prince. And one of the things I thought I might encourage people to do is as they go to joelrosenberg.com, of course, we have that link on our website there, they can sign up and get your updates because that's the first I heard about it from you. And the people that you brought with you are the kind of people we interview here on Point of View. So for us to be able to interview you or others that have actually spent time with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, not to mention, of course, you were with King Abdullah and Jordan and others, it just brings a sense of reality to what is happening right now. And even though now, as you said, it's kind of old news that the president was trying to put together a peace plan, I think that every one of those is doomed to some kind of difficulty because you can't get the Palestinians involved. But nevertheless, it was an attempt to try to put together something that has at least the potential to bring at least some of the honest brokers in the Middle East together in something that we haven't seen up until now. Is that fair?
That is fair, and it's actually very, very sad and disappointing, but you're right, not surprising that the Palestinian leadership, after 71 years, 72 years, if you go back to 73 years, if you go back to the partition plan of 1947, they rejected every single peace plan except the Oslo Accords that there has ever been presented. And that's just sad because the people that are suffering are Palestinians, not Israelis. But what I have been learning as I've been traveling, as you mentioned, to spend 5 meetings with the president of Egypt, 5 meetings with the king of Jordan now, 2 meetings with the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, 1 with the crown prince of the United Arab Emirates, and now we've been invited to meet with the king of Bahrain later this year, although now the timing may be off a bit. But when you spend time with these Gulf Arab leaders and other Arab leaders, what I'm finding is they all get that the Palestinian leadership has no interest in making peace at this time. But what they're asking themselves is maybe it's time for us to make peace and not wait any longer for the Palestinians. This is what set into motion this idea of my novel, that maybe the Saudis would contact the American president and say, you know what, we're coming to Jerusalem if you'll invite us and sort of, chaperone us, shepherd us into this discussion. And I've had again, this is fiction, Kerby. I'm not saying that the Saudis are going to do this tomorrow or next year. I'm extrapolating based on what I've seen and heard and thinking, okay, there's a lot of conversations I'm not allowed to cite or quote, but if I just project forward, I know, and the Saudi leaders have been open publicly, that they are actively considering maybe we shouldn't wait for the Palestinians anymore. We want them to make peace with Israel, but we have our own national interests. And that is a very interesting question. And as I've said to the Crown Prince, I'm allowed to say what I said to him. Some things I can't say of what he said to me. But what I said to the Crown Prince MBS in Riyadh and in Jeddah, in both of these meetings, I said, listen, Egypt in 1979 made peace with Israel, even though the Palestinians weren't ready to make their own deal. Then in 1994, of course, King Hussein of Jordan made peace with Israel, and they too didn't wait for the Palestinians to make their final peace deal. It's been 26 years. And the question is, who's the next Arab leader that's going to have the courage to say, you know what, I would love it if the Palestinians made peace, but we can't wait forever. And I think that the Gulf states are thinking this way. Now, when they make their own decision, that's, they have a lot of history of not wanting peace with Israel. So I think they're reconsidering, in part because they see Israel as a natural ally economically, technologically, and militarily against Iran and the other terror leaders of the Middle East. So it's something to think about. It's, again, fiction, but The Jerusalem Assassin is written from a perspective of sort of taking you inside these palaces and motorcades and conversations. It's fiction, but it's based on an understanding that it's not as crazy as a person might think when they first pick up a copy of The Jerusalem Assassin.
Sure. And again, it's talking about this unholy alliance between Russia and Iran, North Korea, some of the Islamic terrorist groups. ISIS is not what it was, and Al-Qaeda is not, but there's still so many threats out there, and it's just a good reminder of the fact that even while most of our attention is on what we'll probably talk about after the break, the coronavirus and the virus crisis and those kinds of things, this is still something happening in the Middle East, and it is something that I think you're going to find very interesting. So, again, we have information about that on our website. First of all, you can go to Joel C. Rosenberg, and that is, again, rosenberg.com, joelrosenberg.com. His blog is there. You can find out more about some of the other events that hopefully will transpire in the future. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to get some of his other books, we make that available to you as well. And as I've said before, we will be doing our fundraising week next week. Whether we are able to raise all the funds in 1 week or not is not really the point. We just have got so many great guests. And we also want to make available to you a copy of this book because we just thought it would be something as a thank you for your donation. So we're going to certainly talk about that a little bit later. And in the next hour, of course, we're going to get into the whole issue of the lockdown and shelter in place that is taking place and what this has meant. Also, the far left wish list that was added to the very important stimulus package and how that really transpired and whether or not we're actually going to get some positive votes out of the House and Senate. So we've got a lot more to cover in the next hour. But if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, Joel Rosenberg with us. And again, you can give us a call at 1-800-351-1212. Talking about his book, The Jerusalem Assassin. We'll come back and talk about the coronavirus right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Joe Rosenberg. And if nothing else, we know he's not going to move very far from that bedroom that he is actually quarantined in. So if you would like to join the conversation, that number 1-800-351-1212. We did focus some time and attention on the Jerusalem assassin. But Joel, I thought might as well ask the questions I'm sure everybody else is asking. And that is your thoughts about the coronavirus, this kind of plague that has actually changed all of our lives in very dramatic ways, starting with you, who actually is sequestered in a very small space for the next few days, right?
14 days, and I'm just heading into day 3.
No.
Yeah, I got to. Can you imagine just being in your bed? Now, for some people, are like, yeah, I'd love that. I'd love to have no chores, no cooking, no cleaning. I just want to stay in my room. For some people, that sounds like a dream. I am a little more of an active person and like to
I can't even imagine.
Travel the country and the world and speak and teach. But it is good for writing, I will tell you that. So I'm shifting to jet lag and heading back into the writing mode. So happy to do these interviews. And I will say, just as one note about the Jerusalem assassin, people have been asking me, you tend to write novels that sort of predict the future, which of course is not what I'm trying to do. I just write about worst case scenarios, and as you and I have talked about for years, Kerby. But some people have been saying, well, don't you feel bad that you didn't write a novel about a pandemic? I said, no, are you crazy? Nobody wants to read a novel. That's not entertaining right now. It's too sobering. It's too scary. So hopefully people will still want to read The Jerusalem Assassin. And by the way, you don't even have to go to the bookstore. Many of you can't get to a bookstore, but they'll deliver it. Or if they won't deliver it, just download it on your e-reader, your Kindle, your Nook, your iPad, whatever. Or you can just download it on audio to your phone. So it's never been easier to just read or listen to a novel, and you don't even have to leave your home. So anyway, a little plug for that. But this is an unprecedented moment, Kerby. I'm trying to think. There is no other comparable moment in world history, at least for the last 100 years. And, you have to go back to the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. My wife actually has a grandmother who died of that flu in 1918. And that was a tragic time. 50 million people died around the world. And we pray to God that that's not what this is, or not. It's not what it becomes. It certainly has the prospect of becoming that. But what's strange is, the world is so different than 100 years ago, right? We're so much more globalized. We're so much more interconnected. And I was on the phone just before this call, as I alluded to earlier, with a New York Times religion reporter, and I've been talking to people like this all week, last 2 weeks. And, the first question was, is this the end of the world? Well, no. Biblically, we know this is not the end of the world. That we got a whole tribulation and 1,000 years to go before that. But this is what Jesus spoke of when he talked about the birth pangs. If you look at Matthew chapter 24 and you look at Luke 21, where his disciples specifically ask, give us just one sign that will indicate the end of days, the end of the age, and your return. He could have given them one, but he gave them a whole list. And if you look at the New King James version translation, in both passages, it talks about pestilences. In other words, sweeping, horrific diseases that will be affecting the nations. And that's not one that we have tended to talk about, right? We talk about wars and rumors of wars. We talk about earthquakes, famines, upheavals, revolutions, all of which are in the list also. But I will say that generally speaking, most Christians don't think of global pandemics as part of the list, but it is, meaning it's part of the birth pangs, meaning it's not the end, but it's the beginning of the end. It's heading us closer and closer to the return of Christ. One other point on that, Kerby, I said to the reporter, and who knows how I'll be quoted or if I'll be quoted, but hopefully not misquoted. But I appreciate everybody's prayers that I'm not misquoted for this. But I did say, listen, I have been somebody I believe the Bible and I believe in prophecy, but I'm also one who's very conservative about this theologically. I discourage speculation, sensationalizing, and what's called newspaper exegesis, where you just pick some dramatic event in the newspaper and go, aha, that's Bible prophecy. It usually isn't. But I said to this reporter, when you have a moment that's written of in the scriptures that Jesus spoke of, and then you have a moment that everybody sees is absolutely unprecedented in all of human history, certainly modern history, it gets tougher actually to say, well, that has nothing to do with Bible prophecy. And I said, this is one. We're watching one happen right now.
And I think that's a good answer because a lot of people don't want us to be date setting, and I've certainly been speaking against that for years. But at the same time, you do see this sense of birth pangs. And again, we can ask our wives to say that birth pangs mean increased in frequency and intensity. Well, this is about the most intense thing I've seen. My wife has a relative that died in the same Spanish flu, but that was so far back, it's sort of ancient history. But now we once again are seeing that even though we think we control this world, even though we think our science and our medical abilities are so great, we really still are at the, if you will, at the basic end of the ability of us to control certain things, where you can't necessarily always guarantee that everybody's going to be healthy. We can't always guarantee that we're going to live in a safe environment. And so, if nothing else, that's kind of a great way to answer that, is that, of course, we don't want to go any further than that. But at the same time, we do want to at least acknowledge that what we're talking about right now is something that's unprecedented. When we say it's unprecedented, increase in intensity certainly fits in with Matthew 24, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think it's one of those moments where, sometimes there are judgment calls, and you're like, I don't know if that's really prophetic or not. I feel very comfortable in saying this fits right in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, and it's an indicator, right, that we're getting closer to the rest of the events that happen in Revelation. I said very specifically to this Times reporter, we are not in the book of Revelation. We are not in the tribulation or those events, but those events talk about pandemics, plagues that kill a third of the world.
Yes.
So in other words, the birth pangs are designed to say that something is coming, right? In an actual birth pang, my wife had all our four sons, and that intensity and the frequency and the intensity, as you say, but also the gap, the respite between contractions becomes less and less as you get closer to the moment, and you know it's coming. The moment that you either want or fear in life, as a prospective parent, it's coming faster and faster and faster. And I think so. I wanted to let you know, Kerby, also that I just contracted with a national polling firm to put several questions out in the field, and maybe once we get those numbers back at the end of the week, I'm happy to get them to you.
Please,
whether you have feedback on or you just talk about them.
Either way, yes.
But I think, we're at this moment where I'm curious what other people what does the nation think about these things, and is it causing them to be more spiritual? Like we ask people if they're Christians, is it causing you to read the Bible more, listen more to Bible teaching and sermons and worship services online, etc.? But we're also asking specifically people who are not Christians, if they don't identify themselves as Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox Christian, we've got a different set of questions. Are you reading the Bible for the first time? Are you those types of things? We also ask people, do they think this is prophetic, and is it a sign of judgment, or is God just shaking us, or does this have nothing to do with God and the Bible? I'm fascinated to see what those answers are. I really don't know what to anticipate, but by the end of this week, certainly early next, we should be able to get you those numbers, and I think it'll open up a lot of opportunity. I'm grateful for doors to open to talk about prophecy, but there are seasons when people want to talk about it, and there's seasons when they just think it's crazy. And when the Washington Post and the New York Times call in the same week, they say, "What are you thinking?" I'm thinking, it's time to talk about these things.
New opportunity. Let's take a break. When we come back, of course, we are talking about the spiritual implications of the coronavirus. What about the political implications? Joel Rosenberg was not exactly a Donald Trump fan. I think he's changed his mind in light of some of the things that have happened, even in Israel. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The January 2020 edition of Christianity Today features the headline, "The Hidden Cost of Tax Exemption." The author makes his case for why American churches may be better off for refusing what he calls the government largesse of tax exemptions. The article portrays churches in America as basically parasitical, with pastors feeding on the benefits their churches drain from their host community without returning much noticeable benefit. The story contends that the appeal of the tax exemption is rooted in a historical desire to propagate racism and further discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The story ends with these words: "It might not be such a bad thing to lose tax-exempt status. The true Church of God, after all, is not reliant on its special status in the tax code. We can walk by faith and not by government largesse." Well, in truth, rather than make churches more ideologically faithful, the loss of the tax exemption for churches would invade upon church autonomy and curb religious liberty. The true Church of God is less a target to be taxed or a parasite to be crushed, and more a quiet blessing upon a world in need of the peace they preach and acts of service they humbly perform. A local gathering of religious believers should be viewed as a human right of religious association and free exercise worthy of protection, rather than a potential stream of revenue. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Joe Rosenberg with us for a few more minutes. Let me just mention again, we have a link to joelrosenberg.com. You can find out more about his books. If you click on events, of course, you'll find out that, of course, the book tour is ended. But I thought I might just mention that this summer he will be speaking at Word of Life the last week in June. I'll speak the first week in July. Last time you and I were together, that was kind of fun. But if you stick around at least a day after the 4th of July, I'll get a chance to see you again. But you're there with George Murray, and I'm there with Robert Morgan. But always a great time to cross paths with you, even if for a day or a few hours. So looking forward to that opportunity.
And I was supposed to be with you guys next week.
Yes, I know. It seems like it's getting harder and harder to make that happen. But let's just hope and pray that these summer camps, I know you speak at a number of camps. I speak at Camp of the Woods and Word of Life and a variety of others. I just hope that they survive, because we are hoping that all of that by that time will no longer be a problem. But we don't know. Of course, they just postponed the Summer Olympics, so we'll see. But Joel, let me get your thoughts for just a few minutes, because as anybody has heard you speak before, as you were about 4 years ago looking at the possibility that Donald Trump might indeed be the nominee, you were like, I can't vote for this guy. And eventually, I think your wife sort of talked you into the idea. But of course, we now have 3.5 years worth of history. Last time my wife and I were in Israel, we made sure that we could go over to the embassy, the American embassy there, the U.S. Embassy in Israel, get our picture with the plaque and all of that. This actually has been a surprise to all of us, just starting with Israel alone. I'd have to say, without even any hesitation, that this president has been the best friend Israel's ever had. What are your thoughts?
He has, and you're absolutely right. I was very, very concerned and opposed to the candidacy of Donald Trump. I was pretty outspoken about it during the 2016 election. It's interesting. You're right. I did make a decision just a few days before the election that I had to choose one or the other, and given my even deeper concerns about Mrs. Clinton, I did sort of hold my nose and vote for Mr. Trump. I told myself I was voting for Mike Pence, who's a personal friend, and Trump just happened to be on the ticket.
Yes.
But anyway, a year ago, when I was releasing my last book, The Persian Gamble, I had lunch with the vice president, and at the end of lunch, he said, hey, have you ever met the president? I said, no, I haven't. The next thing I knew, Mr. Pence was bringing me into the Oval Office, where I had a fascinating meeting with the President of the United States, with Secretary Pompeo was in the room sitting with us, then National Security Advisor John Bolton there, and, of course, Vice President Pence. Wow, I have to admit, I was thinking of the old Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong.
Yes.
But as he asked me lots of interesting questions. But the two questions that were the most interesting, Kerby, the first one was, Joel, the vice president just called you an evangelical. Is that true? Are you an evangelical? I said, yes, Mr. President.
Wow.
But your name is Rosenberg. Isn't that Jewish? I said, it is, on my father's side. He goes, well, I don't understand. How can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? Wow. My first question, my first moment ever in the Oval Office, no matter how many scenes I've written in there, the first question was, how can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? And it was such an interesting honor to share the gospel and talk about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, whether you're Jew or Gentile, with the President of the United States. That was pretty exciting. But later in the conversation, he said, so tell me a little about yourself. And I felt maybe it was the nudge of the Holy Spirit. I'm not sure. But I said, well, Mr. President, I should probably tell you that I was a never Trumper until the Thursday before the election. Well, Kerby, I don't know how many people actually use that term in his presence or in the Oval Office.
Probably not a lot.
I did.
Yeah.
And the look in his eyes said not that many to actually say that. Well, I told him exactly that I really didn't believe the conservative promises that he was making based on his history. But my wife said to me, well, don't you believe that Hillary will keep her promises? And I said, yes. She goes, well, that's the thing. So then we have to go by faith, just hoping that Mr. Trump does keep at least some of his promises. And I went on to tell him a list of 8 or 9 specific promises that he had made on policy that he has kept. And I said, if nothing else, you'll go down in history as the most pro-life and the most pro-Israel president in human history and in American history. And I want to thank you. Like, I'm not saying I agree with everything that you say or do, but this is important to me. And it was a fascinating, really, conversation. Very few never-Trumpers ever spend time talking to him. And I would say that many of my never-Trumper friends are Christians who I understand why they struggle with him. I don't understand not giving at least credit where credit is due, again, I've got a lot of problems with the president in the way he says things, the way he does things, but he's doing a lot of things right. And right now, he has never needed more prayer, he and his team, for guiding America through this crisis. This is the biggest crisis he's ever faced in his life, the biggest crisis any of us have faced. Even 9/11, as bad as that was, and I lived through it in Washington, D.C.,
yes,
they didn't shut the churches down, right? I mean, the entire society didn't shut down. It changed a lot for us, but it didn't change everything. And I think I told the president when I met with him, I pray for you and your wife and your family and your team every single day, because that's what the Bible commands us to do. And I just want you to know, even though I wasn't originally for you, I pray for your wisdom, your health, God to bless you. And again, I'm doing that today, and I hope that everybody listening, whatever you think of this president, he needs wisdom more than ever.
I would think so. Again, the coronavirus and the various task force put together by, in large part, Mike Pence. Of course, you and I have known him for some time and think very highly of him. And so we encourage people to pray for the president and for the vice president. And if nothing else, I encourage our people to pray for you. While many of our listeners may be complaining about shelter in place and they only get to leave their house to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy, just think right now about Joel Rosenberg in, a 10 by 10 bedroom, and that is it for another 12, 13 days or whatever it's going to end up being. And I think it illustrates only so well how we can be grateful for whatever God gives to us. So again, Joel, we have a link to joelrosenberg.com. I'm sorry we couldn't have you face-to-face. We understand the circumstances, but we encourage people to pray for you and to get a copy of The Jerusalem Assassin.
Well, I appreciate the prayers, but I'd also say, you don't really, I appreciate the prayers. I'll take them all. But as the founder of the Joshua Fund, a ministry to Israelis and Palestinians and others, we are really praying mostly. I just got off a call with our leadership team for the shut-ins, the elderly, the widows, the people in Israel and the Palestinian territories that are really struggling. I mean, they are old and they're infirm and they're vulnerable, and nobody's coming to visit them, and they don't know how to get food. Our teams are delivering food to their doorsteps. It's, we've been building this team and this ministry for a long time, but I don't think it's ever been as important as it is right now.
And again, we have a link to the Joshua Fund there as well. You can go to joshuafund.com or simply go to Joel Rosenberg. Either way, that will take you there. And thank you for doing that as well. Joel Rosenberg, I'll let you get on with your day, but thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Honored. Thank you, Kerby. Stay safe and healthy. God bless you.
You too. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll start taking some phone calls, and some of you want to make some comments. And also, we're going to look at where we are in terms of the stimulus package and the fact that some have been trying to pack it with all sorts of liberal, progressive ideas. What about some of the studies being done about what this might mean to you and your family? We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we want to give you an opportunity to make some comments. 1-800-351-1212. We're going to talk about the coronavirus. Want to talk a little bit about the stimulus package that originally a number of people on the far left, some of these progressive groups, really tried to load it up with all sorts of progressive ideas. And I want to try to be fair and talk about some of the positive aspects of the stimulus package, some of these things that had no place at all in that bill and legislation. Then a little bit later, we want to talk about two studies, one that is maybe more alarming about the fact that we maybe, according to this study, need to be more vigilant to beat coronavirus. But then a study that has just come out by some individuals we've interviewed on the program who say why the COVID-19 virus may be less deadly than we thought. So I want to give you kind of a counterpoint on that. And then we're going to look at a variety of other issues, what this might mean in your sphere of influence. But let's take some phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head up to Missouri first, KTTK. Janet, I think your husband is a truck driver, and you had some comments. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kerby. Thanks for taking the call. Yes, I know that, the people are quite aware that the truck drivers are having a difficult time out there,
yes.
Due mainly to the rest areas being closed down. Those are so important because there's millions of truck drivers out there. There just isn't enough truck stops to hold every semi that is working to get those products to the people of the nation. And the states need to really look at this and open them back up, hire people to work in there with masks and gloves, have an attendant on duty. If nothing else, to at least have it where they can park and sleep. But having the facilities to be able to use is just as important, though. But I just wanted to let the states realize or know they're hurting everyone by not allowing the truck drivers to have a place to sleep. Because if they're driving tired, that's a danger out there as well as the coronavirus. Right. I mean, it's two different situations, but they can still be deadly.
And again, first of all, I know that in some cases that state jurisdictions enforce the interstate. I assume that would be federal, but again, I'm hoping that some that would be able to express their opinions to the proper authorities are listening right now and might be able to do that. And somebody the other day on one of the talk shows, because I listen to other talk shows, hear what people are talking about. And first of all, I just feel like the truck drivers are on the front lines, just like doctors and nurses and first responders and a variety of others. Pointing out that when you close down these restaurants or for drive-through, well, if you got a big rig, you can't drive through the drive-through. So you got to come up with some alternatives here. So whether it's the truck stops, whether it's the drive-throughs, let's treat our truckers with as much compassion as we can. And for some of you that are listening that maybe have an ear that you can get to a state official to rethink some of these closed truck stops. I was just driving about 2 weeks ago, and my wife and I like to stop at a lot of those truck stops for changing drivers or going to places where you can get food or shower, a variety of others. I mean, things that are closing down are not helpful to them, and we depend on them because they really are our lifeline right now to bring us all those products. So tell your husband we appreciate him, and let's see if we can do something to change that policy.
Well, thank you very much. And prayers go out to all the drivers because right now, like you said, they are crucial. But they need to be treated with respect and not have them to worry where their next meal is going to come from or where they can lay down and take their nap for 10 hours. My husband is currently on his way to Utah for medical supplies, and there's no need also for people to be hoarding because the drivers are out there. They're bringing food and medical supplies every day, and there's no need to be hoarding. But thank you very, very much, Carly, for taking my call.
I appreciate that.
Have a blessed day.
Well, appreciate you calling. And before I get to some other calls, I want to set up the next couple of calls because they want to talk about what some of the Democrat leaders in the House and the Senate are doing so that you can understand their comment. Let me just explain that real carefully. And that is, of course, we have this particular bill. It's known as the CARE bill, and it's a Senate stimulus package. And at first, everything was going fine over the weekend, and that started this time last week when the Senate Majority Leader, that would be Mitch McConnell, asked his Republican committee chairs to work with their Democratic counterparts on planks for this particular piece of legislation. By Saturday night, the Senate Minority Leader, that would be Chuck Schumer, expressed, quote, his delight and surprise at the bipartisan cooperation. So it looked like there was going to be a vote. That did not happen because, let me just quote now from the Wall Street Journal, enter the Democrat left, which trashed the bill as a handout to the wealthy. And so then they started talking about Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are pushing crony capitalism slush fund. That comes from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And then we began to then see that Nancy Pelosi got involved. And when she got involved and when various ideas were put forward, then all of a sudden these were some things which they wanted in the bill or they wouldn't vote for it. Real quickly, a publication of corporate pay statistics by race and race statistics. In other words, this was kind of a race-based issue, even an attempt to bring more people of different ethnic backgrounds on the corporate boards. Required early voting. What does that have to do with the coronavirus? Required same-day voter registration. What does that have to do with the coronavirus? They had provisions for the time for union collective bargaining. Then they went after the airlines. They had a demand for a full offset of airline emissions by 2025. You had then also, they wanted the publication and reporting of greenhouse gas statistics for individual flights. At a time when we may lose some of these airlines because they aren't making any money right now, that is the case. And then also federal $15 an hour minimum wage, permanent paid leave, study on climate change mitigation. Just the other day, of course, I talked about some of those that were actually listed by people like Tom Cotton, the fuel emission standards for the airlines, expansion of wind and solar tax credits, and all of the rest. And so we got to a point where then when it was time for a vote, they couldn't break cloture. You ended up with a 47-47 vote in the Senate, then an attempt to get that vote again yesterday morning. Now we're finally maybe getting to something that actually looks like this. But when we talk about this bill after the break, I'll briefly mention some of the positive aspects of this bill that are in it. But there was an attempt to, like a Christmas tree, just put any kind of liberal progressive idea on that tree. And so far, we've gone nowhere. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Often when I talk about the deaths of despair affecting so many young people, I am asked, why are so many unhappy? There are a number of reasons, but first let's discuss how serious this problem has become. In the U.S., the suicide rate quadrupled for young men and doubled for young women from 1946 to 2006. Another study found that suicidal thinking, severe depression, and the rate of self-injury among U.S. college students more than doubled over less than a decade. Dennis Prager suggests that the reasons for such despair can be put into two categories: loss of values and loss of meaning. The loss of values is easy to document in this country. Judeo-Christian values were important in the founding of this country and important in the maintenance of this republic. Also, middle-class values were important. This would include getting married, making a family, getting a good job, demonstrating self-discipline, and patriotism. Values were also lost when various communal associations declined. The Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville explained that the strength of America derived from their professional, social, civil, political, artistic, philanthropic, and religious institutions. A second reason for despair is lack of meaning. Viktor Frankl, in his classic work, Man's Search for Meaning, reminds us how meaning, or the lack of it, can explain so much about human nature. Poor people can be happy if they have meaning, while rich people who have money but no meaning are usually unhappy. Religious faith can give life meaning, and more young people have no connection to religion. The fastest growing demographic among young people are the nones, those who define themselves as atheist, agnostic, or no preference. So many young people today are unhappy because of the loss of values and the loss of meaning. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and then we have almost an entire full bank of phone calls, so we'll take those in just a minute. But again, just a minute ago, I was critical of some of those on the left or some of the Democrats. Let me be critical of some of the Republicans, especially coming from some of the K Street lobbyists and the Chamber of Commerce and others. The CARES Act, which is held up in the Senate, of course, it may have passed while I've been on the air here, but even so, actually has special benefits to specific industries that exceed about $200 billion. Everybody's trying to put their own ornament on this Christmas tree, and it's not good. So that's a concern on the other side. And then I think just for those of us that are concerned about the national debt and the fact that sending out $1,200 checks to Americans right now, especially when you're sending some of those checks to people who don't really need them, is not wise fiscal policy either. So there are some things on both sides, but most of it has been on the Democrat side. You've even had MSNBC and others that tend to not be very critical of Democrats saying this is ridiculous. And some of the reactions have been unbelievable from a variety of different people that maybe in the past haven't necessarily always been that critical of what has happened on the other side of the aisle. But are there any things that are positive? Well, first of all, we did have the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which provides faster access for employers to credits for paid sick and family leave. We have also business loan and forgiveness for businesses that have faced a crisis during the COVID-19 crisis. We have, of course, an incentive to rehire workers. There would be employers would receive credits and loan forgiveness to actually rehire workers who are laid off by March 1st. Of course, delayed tax filings, that has been ruled by the IRS, but this is actually would be part of the legislation to make that actually formally the case so that you would not owe your taxes or even have to file on April 15th, but you would have it pushed back to July 15th. Also added federal unemployment insurance benefits and temporary relief from the retirement account withdrawal penalties in case people have to go in there. Added charitable deductions, a number of other things. So I don't want you to think that the legislation being considered is all bad, but at the same time, it is just disappointing at a time when people are sick. Some have died. Companies and businesses are really hurting that this kind of politics is getting played out there on Capitol Hill. As I look down the screen, some of you have some very important questions, so I'll do my best to answer those. And if we have time today, I want to go into a couple of studies that have been done, some that are somewhat alarming, others that are saying maybe this isn't as bad as we thought. So I want to try to give you both sides of that particular equation. But let's go first of all to Georgia, WPWB. And Bill, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. I would offer that what we're witnessing at present in the Senate is simply the continuation of the Democrats' ongoing strategy for getting rid of President Trump and reclaiming power. First, they tried Russia, 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 and then it was Mueller, 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 and then impeach, impeach, impeach. Now it's virus, virus, virus.
And I think that's desperate. Yeah. And as we've even pointed out, that there are various dark money groups that are now running these ads and trying to criticize whatever the president says, whatever the vice president says. So there, as I said yesterday, two war rooms, one war room, which is the president, the vice president, and the coronavirus, if you will, task force trying to figure out how to solve that. And the other war room are those trying to figure out how to use this particular crisis to advance a social agenda and also to defeat this president.
Yes, sir, and I'd like to comment on the second war room, if you will. The Democrats are simply desperate to get back into power, and they really don't care how much destruction they cause in the process. Chaos is an opportunity for them, as Clyburn said. Solving the problem is not useful for them. The problem is more useful to them than the solution will be, and once that is understood, everything else they do makes sense.
Well, again, never let a serious crisis go to waste. We've heard that before, haven't we? And so,
absolutely, sir. And I'll not rattle on anymore, but I genuinely believe that they are interested in continuing the problem rather than solving it.
I think that seems to be the case with at least some on that other side of the aisle, so we'll keep watching that. And the reaction has been unbelievable. You've had people in the press who oftentimes tend not to be very critical of the Democratic leadership that have been upset. Yesterday I shared how some people said, we've never seen the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell more angry than we saw him just a few days ago. So obviously, there are a few people that are upset that at a very time when we need to be addressing some of these incredible, if you will, not only medical needs, but economic needs, politics is still being played on Capitol Hill. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll move to South Carolina this time. Stephen, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. Glad to be a part. Quick question. I don't want to tie up the line here because you got a lot of calls and everything. I'm a pastor. I'm a first responder. My wife is an ICU director at one of the local hospitals here, and I've got sons, both of them, that work in ER and flight paramedics. And so we're dealing with this thing on a personal basis day in and day out. And from that standpoint, and this incentive package, I've got a question on it. In that incentive package, was it ever a part that they were trying to get funding for Planned Parenthood involved in this also, instead of just dealing solely with the coronavirus situation? And I'd like to know that, and I'd like to encourage all of our folks. We need to take Sunday, definitely, fast and pray, and I'll stand by and just listen for an answer there, okay?
First of all, I want to say thank you for your service and for your wife's service, and I want to encourage people to pray for Stephen and anyone else in that family that are actually dealing with that. And we're not talking about the current piece of legislation, but the previous one actually did in an underhanded way, try to fund Planned Parenthood. And the way it took place, and I won't go into all the details because it gets into kind of the inside the baseball kind of conversation, but what they did was find a way to provide an exemption to what is called the Hyde Amendment. Now, the Hyde Amendment was put together by Henry Hyde back in the 1980s, which prevented any kind of funding of abortion. And so the argument that's always been made by Planned Parenthood is when we receive any funding, it goes for things other than abortion. But that original piece of legislation that was being promoted in the House by Nancy Pelosi and other individuals attempted to do so, but that was caught pretty early by a lot of the pro-life groups. And let me maybe give a shout out to Tony Perkins and his group at Family Research Council and a couple of others that made a difference. And as far as I understand, nothing like that is in this legislation we're talking about. But again, it illustrates how never let a crisis go to waste. Maybe this would be a way that with some kind of surreptitious action, we would be able to fund Planned Parenthood. And so, Stephen, you're on target with that, not with the current piece of legislation being debated today, but with the previous one. And that's exactly what was taking place. So I appreciate you asking the question.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate it. I just wish all those that were going against this thing would come and stand where my wife and my kids are standing right now, dealing with people day in and day out with this virus and everything, trying to get it under control. But thank you for your service, and we'll be praying for you too. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Stephen. And I would encourage you to pray for his family and to recognize that those first responders are our heroes, and we honor them today. Let's head up to Maine, WSEW. Steve, I think you had a comment real quickly before we take our next break.
Hi, Kerby. Yes, very quickly. I know I just mentioned this the other day, but I wish Americans would just, contact their representatives.
I think we kind of lost you there. Of course, he's up there in Maine. But I think what you're going to talk about is the idea of a line item veto, and so and certain single line item bills. And do we have you now? Yes, I guess we're just, unfortunately, when the cell phones work, they work very well. When they don't, they don't. But I think what he was talking about is the single line bills. And again, there are two issues. Issue number one is a single line bill. When you have this, if you will, comprehensive type of bill, it's never good because then all sorts of different ornaments are added to the tree and everybody thinks it's Christmas and everybody tries to insert different things. So the first point he was making is that. The second is, of course, we wish we could have a line item veto. There was an attempt to actually enact a line item veto at the federal government, and the Supreme Court in the past ruled that that was unconstitutional, that in one way or another that would violate the separation of powers. I would like to see something like that be proposed again and see if the current Supreme Court might rethink that idea, because almost all governors have a line item veto, and a lot of this bizarre kind of far left wish list junk would get pulled out very quickly by President Trump. And a lot of the games that are getting played right now wouldn't be taking place. But anyway, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about a couple studies, one that is concerning, one that is maybe relieving. We'll talk about all that right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Fun laugh hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, the last hour we had a chance to talk with Joe Rosenberg, and I just mentioned in passing, but I thought I'd come back and talk about it for just a minute before I get into these studies on the coronavirus. That next week is, of course, our Truth Team, and that's a time when we oftentimes come to you and bring a number of guests that are talking about very important issues in the news. And next week we'll have Louis Gohmert and Colonel Alan West and Michelle Bachman Hoffman and Oliver North and Rick Santorum and Eric Metaxas, Sean McDowell, just to mention a few off the top of my head, that will be part of that. And one of the things we will be making available, so those of you that support this ministry for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, is this book by Joel Rosenberg. We bought multiple copies, The Jerusalem Assassin, and that is one resource that I'm excited about. But the other one that I'm even more excited about is that we have this flash drive. And if you were watching online, you might say, well, it looks a little different. Yes, because it's got a carabiner. I love that, because what you can do is you can put it on your belt loop, you can put it in your purse. I think it's the kind of thing you would want to give to a young person going off to college and hook it onto their backpack. And what is in it is actually 11 hours, 19 different programs that we think are some of the best programs we've ever done on Point of View. Then we have all sorts of Outlook articles, which add up to about 59 pages of that. We have some of my Viewpoints commentaries, about 24 Viewpoints commentaries, as well as a dozen of our booklets. It's amazing you can get it all on this little flash drive, which actually has two different drives, one for a typical USB-C as well as one for another type. So it is something that we are making available next week. But if you would want to support this ministry ahead of time, as a matter of fact, you could certainly give us a call on our call-in line, which is available, or probably better just to call the pledge line, 1-800-347-5151. I'll talk more about it a little bit later, but just wanted to give you a preview since we were talking about the Jerusalem Assassin book. Next week, I am excited about the guests we have, as well as some of the great material that we're making available to you. And so I just thought that I might give you a little bit of a look ahead at to what we're going to be making available next week. But if you want to call ahead of time and make your pledge, we'd be glad to send that out to you as well. Okay, how bad is the crisis, the virus crisis, going to be? I want to give you probably the worst case scenario. This one comes from the Imperial College in London, which is one that is sometimes cited, which I think is really over the top. It assumes without a doubt the worst case scenario, but I wanted to give that to you so you could know where those numbers are coming from, because sometimes when you hear the press say, well, we could end up having 2 million Americans die. I want to explain where they get those numbers, why I think they're much too extreme, but I wanted you to be able to hear that. And then, interestingly enough, some very good research that's come down now by some individuals that we've had on this program. Dr. Jay Richards, of course, has been on many times. Dr. Doug Axe has been on, and then William Briggs. And their piece that has showed up on the stream, Why COVID-19 May Be Less Deadly Than We Thought. So I'll give you a one that raises a lot of concerns and maybe scares too many people, and then one that maybe calms those, and you can then read it for yourself. But the figure that comes from this study done by the Imperial College in London assumes, first of all, that you would have 80%, more than 80% of the American population being infected with COVID-19. That does seem high, and it's, of course, based on the assumption that there were no actions taken. Right now, of course, how many of you are living in a community or a state or a city where shelter in place has already been implemented? So again, this is assuming that indeed there were no mitigation processes taking place that are actually in place through a lot of the country right now to slow the spread of infection, and maybe some actually preventing future infection. So again, that's kind of the upper limit number of 2 million at 80% of the population. And if nothing else, this also assumes some other things, that we would also have a younger audience, younger individuals and American citizens being affected. And to be fair, in Italy, we've had some places where doctors have had to reserve ventilators for younger, healthier individuals. But again, I wonder how many were smoking, how many were vaping, and all the rest. But a good question that was asked the other day is, okay, this is the study that gets cited so often. How accurate is the study? And I love what Kevin Pham points out. Like all projections and models, it's as good as the assumptions and the data that goes into it. The Imperial College London model is built on a good model. It's based on models built for pandemic influenza and tries to stimulate the activity and infectiousness of hundreds of millions of individuals. But that being said, it still paints, I think, to be fair, the worst case scenario, a scenario that would be taking place right now if none of the kind of actions being taken in terms of social distancing and shelter in place. And, of course, it also is based upon the fact that human beings are selfish and that human beings won't act responsibly. Of course, we have already yesterday even talked about some of the young people that all gathered together at the beaches and other individuals that seem less likely to follow those rules. But I would have to say that that is the worst case scenario. Okay, by now you're saying, can you give me better news? Well, this one, interestingly enough, comes from our friends, most of whom work at the Discovery Institute in Seattle. And they said that, again, when you look, let's take Italy as the worst case scenario right now. They say that the numbers there suggest that even in Italy, the numbers that we have right now suggest that the coronavirus is less deadly than we'd feared. By the time the Italian authorities had their country in lockdown on March 10th, over 10,000 Italians had been infected with the coronavirus. Health authorities worldwide concluded that the response was too late. The virus was then too widespread to be controlled. They were probably right, they say. Judging by published numbers, the virus paid no attention to the March 10th restrictions. So that is when they look at Italy, they're starting to see whether or not you're being able even now to bend the curve there. Okay, so the argument being made by Jay Richards, Doug Axe, and William Briggs is that the deadliest viruses oftentimes cause huge spikes in death rates. They give some examples, for example, of the Spanish flu back in 1918, but we aren't getting that that huge spike. We're getting more of a curve, they're arguing. So they said so far no country-level COVID-19 death count has surpassed its normal pre-pandemic death count. Spain, for example, which loses about 1,200 people on a regular day, is now attributing about a quarter of that to COVID-19. Italy, with a population of 60 million, sees about 1,800 deaths on a normal day. The coronavirus or COVID-19 virus is now reported to claim under half of that. And so they say by our estimates, the daily death count there should start to drop within days. And they're showing the diagram here, which you can see if you'd like to read the graph and look at the content there. And Iran, one other country which has been suffering under this, seems to have peaked at about 150 virus deaths per day, which again is a small fraction of those that have died from other causes, because after all, people die every single day of all sorts of things. So the argument being made by these individuals is that when you even look at the worst case scenarios, they, by the way, are ignoring China, because I think those numbers are completely unreliable. But when you look at Italy, look at Spain, and you look at Iran, if anything, maybe the death count that has been projected isn't as bad as we might have suspected. And, of course, in this country right now, with social distancing, shelter in place, even lockdowns, that, of course, has made some very significant changes as well. So we come back from the break. What does that mean? I've already mentioned when we were talking with Joel Rosenberg that the Olympics have been postponed, I suspect, for a year. What does that mean in terms of the elections? Some people are suggesting that the November elections could be election by mail. I'm not so sure about that. Then how are we going to patrol this? Right now we have a police force in California that have already purchased Chinese-made patrol drones with night vision cameras in order to begin to patrol the coronavirus lockdown. You have some that have actually put in place gun bans and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has actually gone ahead and allowed that. And then what does this mean in terms of our own personal finances, not to mention some of the businesses? So we'll get into a few aspects of the coronavirus right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The January 2020 edition of Christianity Today features the headline, The Hidden Cost of Tax Exemption. The author makes his case for why American churches may be better off for refusing what he calls the government largesse of tax exemptions. The article portrays churches in America as basically parasitical, with pastors feeding on the benefits their churches drain from their host community without returning much noticeable benefit. The story contends that the appeal of the tax exemption is rooted in a historical desire to propagate racism and further discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The story ends with these words: "It might not be such a bad thing to lose tax-exempt status. The true Church of God, after all, is not reliant on its special status in the tax code. We can walk by faith and not by government largesse." Well, in truth, rather than make churches more ideologically faithful, the loss of the tax exemption for churches would invade upon church autonomy and curb religious liberty. The true Church of God is less a target to be taxed or a parasite to be crushed, and more a quiet blessing upon a world in need of the peace they preach and acts of service they humbly perform. A local gathering of religious believers should be viewed as a human right of religious association and free exercise worthy of protection, rather than a potential stream of revenue. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just, if I can, try to give you a little bit of a look as to what might happen in the future, because right now they're talking about how this is going to affect elections. Many of you are in a state right now where you've had a primary, but then you've needed a runoff, and they've tried to postpone those. Many of us live in various states where there would have been May local elections. The last time I looked, most of them now have been postponed from May to November. But what does this mean for November? And even though there are all sorts of rumors out there and conspiracy theories of the idea of delaying the November 3rd election, that's not happening. But it is at least theoretically possible, let's hope we don't have to do it, that all of you listening here would have to vote by mail. There are a number of states that already do that, so you may be living in a state right now and say, well, that wouldn't make any difference because we vote by mail right now. But most of the country does not. So that's one of those issues. But of greater importance right now is we have individuals in the House and Senate, of course, debating the CARES bill as well as a number of others right now. And they, in a sense, are in violation of the CDC guidelines. I mean, we're not talking about having 10 people with social distancing. We're talking about members of Congress that are actually testing positive. We have one representative out of Florida, another one out of Utah that are already testing positive. Of course, I mentioned just the other day, Senator Rand Paul out of Kentucky also has tested positive. So that's why the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer has said that although no decision has been made, they're trying to figure out how you could, in Congress right now, have remote voting or something that would be very different. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has asked the House Rules Committee to come up with a report on alternative voting options. And, of course, you can have people filing in single file to cast their vote, but you can just see how this is a real difficulty. And so this is where we kind of run into what is happening right now, but even more significantly, what could happen in the future in terms of our electoral process. Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut recently has said that the states might need to consider alternative voting methods for maybe some kind of remote voting or something like that. I think it would be a complete and unmitigated disaster to allow people to vote by internet. You can see all the possibilities that that could be hacked and manipulated and the rest, but we'll have to see how this plays out over the next couple of months. For those of you in California, we now have one police department planning on using drones equipped with cameras and loudspeakers to monitor the coronavirus shutdown. These fleet of drones have now been purchased from a Chinese company. Why? Well, the Chinese have already been using that against its citizens for some time. And then they would be fitted with night vision cameras. And so, again, the captain of Chula Vista said, we've not traditionally mounted speakers on our drones, but if we need to cover a large area to get an announcement out, or if there's a crowd somewhere where we need to have it disperse, we could do that without getting police officers involved. So this is a change that most of us have never seen before and, of course, of concern. I have mentioned the fact that there have been a number of various attempts to actually ban gun sales. Illinois is a good example. Let me take the one in Pennsylvania, where Sunday night the Pennsylvania Supreme Court actually denied an emergency request that would have blocked order by the governor mandating the closure of gun retailers in response to the coronavirus. And so this is part of the order to shut down gun stores was part of a larger plan set forth by the Governor Tom Wolf, mandating the closure of businesses not deemed to be life-sustaining. And so that is an ongoing battle that will be taking place for some time. And, of course, the biggest issue is, of course, how this is going to affect not just the businesses, and they might be taken care of with this new piece of legislation if it passes, but what it means to you. And this piece by Kristen Tate reminds us that if you're like most Americans, how long are you going to be able to sustain yourself if you aren't earning an income? Because she reminds us, interestingly enough, of something I've written viewpoints commentaries on, that only about 40% of Americans, when asked if they could afford an unexpected $1,000 expense, could do so. In fact, nearly 80% of workers are living paycheck to paycheck, according to this research that was done a number of years ago. And she says it's no surprise that the probability of an economic recession brought about by this pandemic has caused many of you, including those of you listening right now, to worry. She does point out that we have lived maybe a more luxurious lifestyle that's causing us to rethink some of our priorities, because more than 80% of Americans own smartphones, she says. A smaller proportion have also a high-definition flat-screen television. Over 60% of Americans dine out at least once a week, while nearly 20% dine out 3 or more times a week. And so some of this is causing people to maybe kind of rethink some of their priorities about what is necessary for our health. And where in the past, maybe we thought of smartphones, fancy television sets, restaurant meals as luxuries, they've become kind of necessities. So this whole challenge is going to be a real crisis for us in the future. And so even though next week we're going to be, of course, talking about how you can support this ministry, and I hope we are a lifeline to you, I hope that you'll also consider what you might do to help us out, because one of the things we want to put in your hands is not only this book by Joel Rosenberg, The Jerusalem Assassin, but I suggested we put together this flash drive, which, again, it's amazing how much you can put into these. We have 19 different programs, some of the best programs we've ever been able to produce, which if you sat down and listened to them would take you 11 hours. Then we have about 24 of my Viewpoints commentaries, about 59 pages of Outlook articles, and a dozen of our booklets. And I think this is helpful for you, especially if you're stuck at home. But most importantly, if you know of a young person, maybe in high school or college, it has a carabiner on it, so you can just literally clip it to their particular backpack. But if they find themselves in a debate on capitalism versus socialism, a debate about arguments for the existence of God, messianic prophecy, maybe arguments about traditional marriage, transgenderism, all sorts of issues, we have included what we think are some of the best programs we've ever done, the best articles and booklets we've ever done, some of my best Viewpoints commentaries, and that's one of the things we want to make available to you just as a thank you for your support. So I hope that you will take the time to listen in next week. But if you'd like to get it ahead of time, you certainly can call us even as we go off the air today. Our pledge line number is 800-347-5151. As we go to the website, let me mention that we have information about Joel Rosenberg's book and also a link to his website. My Viewpoints commentary today is about why are so many young people unhappy? After all, we, even with this crisis still, are the wealthiest and richest people that have ever existed on this planet, some of the healthiest people, and yet young people are still so unhappy because I think of the fact of a loss of values and a loss of meaning. And so that's one of the things we talk about so often here on Point of View. So let me encourage you to go to the website to find some of these resources, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow because we're going to cover many more issues in the news, along with, of course, this issue of the coronavirus. So I hope that you'll go to the website, pointofview.net, and hope you'll join us tomorrow here on Point of View. I want to thank Doug and Steve in studio, as well as Andrew, long distance, putting this program together. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.